things ready. So 2 minutes to get our class things ready for us to go, and make sure you show me in the participants window when you are ready with all 5 of these materials that you need for class. Okay. Okay, so far I see checks from Amber, Edward, Fernanda, and Gabriel. Thank you guys for putting in your checks. I see a check from Melanie, Nick, Vanessa, and Zara. Let's see. I feel like more people maybe. Adrian, Alex, and Celeste, I see your checks as well. If I have not called out your name yet, that means I don't see a check from you. Camilla, I see your check. I almost called you Kamala, I'm sorry. Lena, thank you for the chat the mention in the chat there. Adam, I see your check, thank you.
It keeps taking mine away.
Okay, thank you, Mia, for that. Yeah, it's the update, the Zoom update has really messed up this system. Maybe I need to update. Maybe that's what it is as well. I mean, I should. So Carter, thank you for the chat communication. So let's see, I'm still missing. So now I'm talking about the missings, right? Or any kind of communication. Kennedy, thank you for the communication. Still missing information or some kind of conference. Ziana, thank you for the communication. Still waiting for something from Steve, Nadeline. Still waiting for something from Jaylene. Oops. Still waiting for something from Denelson, Delani. And I think Devin. I don't think Devin contacted me. Or Devin, did you have your check? And I didn't see it. Guys, give me one quick second. I'm so sorry. Okay. So, okay, Devin, I see your response in the chat. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's go ahead and actually get started with our lesson. Today is very important. It's a continuation of our two-way tables, okay? It's a continuation of two-way tables. So we're still talking about the two-way frequency tables that we started talking about in lesson 16. Today, however, we're going to be giving it a little bit more vocabulary, okay? And we're going to differ the types of relative frequencies that we can find, or the types of frequencies that we can find. So we're going to attach some vocabulary to some of the concepts that we've already talked about in lesson 16, and then we're going to build on it, okay? So let me put this into presentation mode. Oh, presentation mode is already there. Okay, hold on, we got to go back. There we go. That was fun, wasn't it? It's like a backwards time capsule. Okay, so lesson 17. Our objective, ladies and gents, is that students will calculate conditional, marginal, and joint frequencies. So those are the 3 different types of frequencies that we need to know the difference of, okay? Conditional, marginal, and joint frequencies. and explain what they mean in the context of the data. Okay, so that's going to come in the process of understanding what each of them are and how they differ. Our essential concept starts us off on some of that differences, okay? So marginal or marginal relative frequencies tells us about the distribution of a single variable. So the marginal frequencies or the marginal relative frequencies, those are only about a single variable. So, you know, owning cats or not owning cats, just a single variable, right? Like the ownership of cats. Or I can ask separately, how many students play an instrument. Again, I'm only asking about one variable, right? Instruments. So marginal relative frequencies only talk about one of the variables. Joint frequencies, okay, joint frequencies talk about two of the variables. So that would be like, how many kids own a cat and play an instrument. So something like that, okay? Conditional relative frequencies, okay? Conditional relative frequencies tell us about the distribution of one variable when we're subsetting another. So for example, it's pretty much like splitting our data, right? So splitting our data by one of the variable categories. So like owning a cat versus not owning a cat. And then looking at one of the other variables based on those split data. So if I say, okay, what's the percentage of students who owned a cat? So we're just looking at owning a cat, right? That also played an instrument. Or what's the percentage of students that don't own a cat? So from those students that don't own a cat, how many of them or what percentage of them play an instrument? And so with conditional relative frequencies, we subset our data we split it into the different categories. And then we look at those categories independently, okay? So joint and conditional they're both about two variables, but in very different ways. Okay, we're gonna talk about more examples about that. Okay, Alex, that's fine. Okay, so these are the vocabulary we're gonna be talking about today: marginal frequency, marginal relative frequency, joint frequency, joint relative frequency, and conditional relative frequency. Okay. Now, what you're going to realize as we do our notes is we've already talked about the first four vocabulary words here. In lesson 16, we already talked about marginal, we talked about joint, and we talked about relative frequency. We just didn't give them these names. So today we're going to attach the name to what's what, okay? So these are our vocab words for today. All right. Just a heads up, guys, this is the last day for collecting data on our time use campaign, okay? Last day. So whatever we've collected up until this point, that's it, okay? So last day for data collection for our time use campaign. All right, let's take a look at our next assignment here. Oops, nope, go back. Today should be maybe like day 8, I think. I think today should be day 8. I was looking at the data collection and it wasn't as strong as I wanted. So today I think is day 8 from when we first started. Day 8 or 9. Okay, yeah. Okay. So what we're going to do is now we're going to take a look at the 1.16 questions and variables and the 2 questions that you came up with there. So remember, for example, my questions were, do you wear glasses and do you like to read? Those were my 2 questions, right? The activity that you're about to do is I want you guys to strategize about how you will collect and record your data. So you have those 2 questions. How are you going to ask people those 2 questions. What process are you going to use? So are you going to walk up to people and ask them? Are you going to text people? Are you going to call? Are you going to give a survey? If so, how are you going to administer that survey? Are you going to use Instagram polls or Facebook or Google Forms or WhatsApp or Discord? Like, what are you going to use? And how are you going to collect your data? That's essentially the goal of the next 5 minutes. Okay, so what you are going to do is you are going to go to your 1.17, hold on, your 1.17 group activity, and you should be able to see it in our section 3 page. Okay, so here's our section 3 page. You should be able to see our section 3 page right here, 1.17 group activity. I can also put the link in our chat for those of us that struggle getting to different tabs here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put you guys into breakout rooms. And in these breakout rooms, you are going to have 5 minutes to discuss and record how you'll be collecting on your data, okay, with your 2 questions. And then I want you guys to start. I want you to ask your 2 questions to the rest of your group, okay? So how you're going to input this information, okay, breakout room 1, all members are going to write in their own name right up here. So each member should write in their own name. And then you're going to choose one of the lines. So for me, I'm going to say Miss K. My name is Miss K. I'm going to collect my data using an Instagram. No, actually, I'm going to collect my data using a Google form. And I'm literally going to say that. Okay, that's it. Miss K, Google form. And then I'll take my couple of questions and I'll ask my classmates about, hey, do you wear glasses? Yes or no? Do you, and then I'll ask them, do you like reading? Yes or no? So I'll ask them those 2 questions and I'll be done, okay? You are only getting 5 minutes, so there really isn't a lot of time to waste here. And I erase my entry here, okay? So there really isn't a lot of time to waste here, all right? Any questions on the activity?
You said we could use Instagram poll, right?
Yes, yes, I did, yeah. Okay, so put you guys into breakout rooms here. Okay, and create, and I'm gonna go ahead and open it up. All right, so let's take a look. Mia's gonna use Instagram poll, right on. Amber, Instagram poll. Melanie, Instagram poll. Ooh, Instagram poll was popular in this group, right on. Okay, you guys are finishing up. That's totally fine. Let's see. Kitso's gonna use a Facebook poll. Got it. Oop, move too fast there. Jaylene, Instagram, and Diane, Twitter, social media for the win. Instagram. Okay, so Nick wants to do surveys, but Nick, you gotta let me know how you're gonna be giving that survey. Like, how are you distributing that survey? Are you using a poll? Are you using Google Forms? How are you going to be distributing that survey? Are you going to text people the survey? Like, what's going to happen? Okay. I just let in a few people, but who did I just? Oh, that was Araya. Give me a quick second, guys. Okay. So you gotta let me know specifically, right? Which one you're using here. Okay. Instagram, texting. Okay, so combo there. There's nothing wrong with combo. Instagram, Google form, right on Celeste. Okay, let's see here. Looks like Gabriel was the only one active in breakout 6. Okay. Let's see, he's going to be using Instagram poll. Instagram. I like the breakdown of the questions there, guys. Good job. Okay, so most of us are planning on using some sort of social media poll, right? Um, Carlos, you make me laugh. So most of us are using some sort of social media poll. And for that, that's good. The only caution I have for you guys is this, okay? Make sure that whatever method that you choose to use, you make sure that you are able to see if one person answered both of your questions, okay? So in order to count that person as an observation, you need to have a response for both of your questions, or else the tallies for your responses for each question will be off, right? So one person needs to answer both your questions. If they only answer one of your questions, you can't include their answer, because then the total for like one question is going to be different from the total from the other question as far as like how many people surveyed, okay? And then you're going to have issues in your two-way table. So you got to make sure that whoever you survey, whoever answers your questions, they are responding to both of your questions. So you will need to make sure that if you're doing like an Instagram poll or a Facebook poll or a Twitter poll, you're able to see who answered your question. Okay, so I think on Twitter though, like in order for them to take the poll, you can put both questions at once. But Instagram, I think you have to do separate posts, right? Separate story posts. And for that, you need to then double check that the person, like this person who answered and for the first question also answered the second question. But overall, great job. It looks like you guys are making great use of social media to essentially take your data collection further. That's awesome. All right, great job on this activity, guys. So well done. I appreciate your participation. Okay, so we start our notes portion of our lesson. So I want us to switch gears, make sure you guys have your notebooks out. And again, if you're taking notes in your IDS practice book, that's going to be pages 126 and 127. So what I'm going to do is we're looking at the same table that we were looking at for lesson 16, cat ownership and instruments, right? Remember Rosa and her story with her 35 art students there? So we have the same two-way frequency table. I have 3 questions here for you. How many students own a cat? What is the proportion of students who own a cat? And what is the proportion of students who do not play an instrument? Okay. So I'm going to give you guys a minute and I want you guys to answer these questions to yourselves in your notes. Okay. 1 minute to answer these questions to the best of your ability. All right. So let's see some participation in the chat for the first question. So how many students own a cat? Let me know in the chat. How many students own a cat? Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you, Amber. Thank you, Fernanda. Thank you, Mel. Thank you, Devin. Oh, thank you, Celeste. Thank you, Lena and Zara and Adam. Thank you, Diane and Mia. Thank you, Carter. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Carlos. Okay, Carlos. Thank you, Araya. Yes. Okay. Everyone that participated, you are absolutely correct. The number of students, right? How many students own a cat? We're talking about this number right here, 16. So 16 of the students own a cat. Okay. So that was only asking about cat ownership, right? So how many students own a cat? Now, what if I ask you, what is the proportion of students who own a cat? right? How would you give me the proportion? Good, Vanessa. Proportion, remember, proportion is a ratio, fraction, decimal, percentage, right? What is the proportion of students, AKA what is the percent of students who own a cat? Okay. Any other takers? Just Vanessa? Okay. Give me the fraction, guys. Give me the fraction. I want the fraction. What is the proportion of students that own a cat? So remember to find our proportion. Yes, Amber, thank you. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Fernanda and Nick and Mia and Zara. Okay, yes. So to find the proportion of students who own a cat, we take the number of students who own a cat and we put it over the total number of students that were surveyed. So the total number of students that were asked the questions, right? So the proportion of students that own a cat are going to be 16 out of 35, which simplifies down to approximately 46%, right? So we get 0.46, multiply that by 100, and we get 46%, okay? So then using that knowledge, what is the proportion of students who do not play an instrument, right? This question is completely separate of these two. What is the proportion of students who do not play an instrument? Okay, do not play an instrument. So you're looking at the number of students that do not play an instrument. How many students do not play an instrument? Okay.
18 out of 35, right?
Yeah, I have two questions coming through in the chat. We got 9 out of 35, and then we have 18 out of 35.
That's
Okay. So, yeah, so we want to look at the total, right? Because this question on its own, this question it's not saying anything about cat ownership, whether they own a cat or not. It's simply just asking about students that do not play an instrument. So we want to look at the total number of students that do not play an instrument, and that total is 18 right there. So yes, 18 out of 35 would be our proportion. Yes, Mia. Okay. I was like, oh my gosh, a lot of kids are saying 9 out of 35. And I feel like you guys were looking at owning a cat and not playing an instrument, right? But if you just look at the question that you're being asked, we're not making assumptions of it's connected to previous. If I wanted you guys to look at both variables, I would have both variables in the question, right? Okay. Mia. Well, every time you do pay attention, you are smart. Okay, so what we just talked about, okay, so notice we are looking at one variable at a time, right? How many students own a cat? That's it, just own a cat. Proportion of students who own a cat, that's it, right? Nothing about instruments. This question, students who do not play an instrument, just about instruments, right? Nothing to do with cats in that situation. So we're looking at one variable at a time, one category at a time. This is what we call marginal frequencies, okay? Marginal frequencies, because the answers are being found in the margins of our table. So these are called marginal frequencies because the answers are found in the margins of our table. So what do I mean by that? We found all of our answers in the margins here, okay? We found 16 here under the total column. We found 18 here under the total row, okay? So the margins are the rows and the column, the row and the column that show the totals. So we're talking about the margins of our table here, okay? The outskirts, the borders. So these are called marginal frequencies. So A here is the marginal frequency of how many students own a cat, okay? And then you have your marginal relative frequencies, right? Remember relative frequencies from lesson 16? So these are the marginal relative frequencies because they are calculated from the subtotal that is divided by the grand total. So subtotal divided by the grand total. Subtotal divided by the grand total, right? So these are your subtotals per category. And then we can get the marginal relative frequencies by dividing by the grand total here. So B and C are the marginal relative frequencies. And again, the key here is looking at the question. The questions are only asking you about one of your variables, only one, okay? So I'm gonna give you guys a minute to get these notes down. And if you do not finish taking down the notes within the minute that I give you, the link to the PowerPoint is on the section 3 page for lesson 17. It is this exact same PowerPoint. You can literally open it up and finish taking your notes.
Can we just take a picture too?
Absolutely, go for it. Okay. Okay. So that's our time. So now let's take a look at another set of questions here. Okay, same table, same exact table. Now suppose we have these questions. How many students own a cat and play an instrument? So notice how there's two variables in the question now. How many students own a cat and play an instrument? What is the proportion of students that own a cat and play an instrument? Okay. What is the proportion of students who do not own a cat and play an instrument? So I see a lot of you guys are already answering my first question here. Cool. Maybe we don't need that minute to look that up. That's fine. So how many students own a cat and play an instrument? A lot of you guys are coming at me with a 7. Okay. Owns a cat, plays an instrument. 7 it is. Absolutely. Yes. Good job, guys. That was quite, thank you, Vanessa, Fernanda, Melanie, Lena, Adam, Araya, Carter. Okay. And so 7, right? 7 students own a cat and play an instrument. So then it asks us, what is the proportion of students that own a cat and play an instrument? So now we're looking at the students that own a cat and play an instrument, right? So I'm seeing some of you guys coming through here. Thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Carter. Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Lena. Let's see. Come on, guys. Maybe we need 7 over 35. Thank you, Mia. Very good. Jaylene came at me with 2 separate ones. Yes, Jaylene. Yes, Steve. Very good. Fernanda, that's very good. Yeah, thank you, Zayana. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Alexander. So yes, this proportion, right? Remember, every time you see the word proportion, we're talking about fractions, right? So proportion of students who own a cat and play an instrument. 7 students own a cat and play an instrument. The proportion would be 7 out of 35, okay, which would be about 20% there. So only 20% of the 35 students own a cat and play an instrument, okay? Then it asks, what is the proportion of students who do not own a cat and they play an instrument? Go ahead.
I said 10 out of 35. And I was going to ask you, I was just going to start saying it versus writing it in the chat, if you don't mind.
That's fine.
Okay.
Totally fine. Thank you. So yes, I'm seeing a lot of you guys, 10 out of 35. Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you, Mel. Thank you, Lena. Thank you, Devin. Yes, in this situation, we have a 10 out of 35 because we have students who do not own a cat, right? students that do not own a cat, we're looking at that row right there. And they play an instrument. So we're looking at that column right there. So 10 would be our number. 10 would be how many, but they're asking proportion. So that would be 10 out of 35. Okay. And that's approximately 28.6%. Okay. Or some of us rounded it up to a full percent. 29% is totally fine. Okay. So notice that the answers to these questions here, where we had two variables happening, right? The answer to these questions were located in these cells right here that are the body. They are the body of the table. Okay, so here are the totals, are our margins. These guys right here, where our two variables intersect, this is the body of our table. Okay, these are called joint frequencies because we're combining two variables to get them. Okay, so we're joining two variables. So these are called joint frequencies. So we can see that we had the 7 from here, we got the 10 from here, right? This 9 is about owns a cat but does not play an instrument. This 9 is about does not own a cat and does not play an instrument, right? So this is the body of our table. Questions B and C, right, now that we're finding proportions, that's where the word relative comes in. So B and C, because we found proportions, these are called joint relative frequencies, since we're expressing them out of the total number of occurrences, or the grand total, right, of people surveyed. So once again, I'll give you guys a minute to get these notes down, and then we'll continue. All right, guys. So this brings us to our journal entry. Oh, I apologize. I had one more nice little graph for you here. If you're going to screenshot, I'm sorry, can you re-screenshot? I forgot about that little slide up there. But these just show our joint relative frequencies, right? We had our marginal relative frequencies right here. Oops, sorry. These just show us our joint relative frequencies. That's all it is. Okay. Okay. So this brings us to our IDS journal. Okay. I want you guys to pay attention to how different this question is compared to these questions here about our proportion of students that own a cat and play an instrument. Okay, pay attention to this question right here. Do a greater proportion of students in Rosa's art class who do not own cats prefer to play an instrument than those who do own cats? Okay. Suppose we took out Rosa's art class. Okay, forget that. Do a greater proportion of students who do not own cats prefer to play an instrument than those who do own cats? Okay, notice that we have a comparison happening, right? We have a comparison between students that do not own cats versus students that do own cats, and whether or not they prefer to play an instrument. Okay, so Adam's already telling me yes. Okay, and maybe he's looking at these numbers. But this is leading us into our next type of frequency, right? So in your journals here, I want you to input the following responses, okay? In your IDS journal, write where on the table you would find this information. So where on this table would you find the information that would help you answer this question? Okay, so would you find it in the margins? Would you find it in the body? Where would you find it? And then how would you calculate it, right? Remember, we're talking proportion here, so we do have some calculation to happen. So you are essentially answering this question, or you're preparing to respond to this prompt given this question about this table. And you are doing this in your IDS journal, your section 3 journal, okay? So I'm going to give you guys 3 minutes to do that, and then we're going to come back. Okay, would anyone like to share what they wrote in their journal, either verbally or through the chat? I can call on some people.
I put, you can find the information in the body of the table.
Body of the table, good. Okay, thank you. Were there people that is there anyone that disagrees with Steve? That the information can be found in the body of the table? Does anyone think that it can be found in the margins of the table?
Which one is what is the margins again? Which part is
the margins are your column, like your total column and your total row. Those are your margins, yeah.
Could we say both? Could be found in both.
Okay, you say they can be found in both. Interesting. Okay.
I think
okay.
That's what I do not know how to say their name, and I do not want to say it wrong. So.
He goes by Nick.
Nick. Okay, I agree with Nick.
Okay. Although personally, I gotta say, I always say this, but personally, I love his real name, Odom Vishnu. Actually, Odom Vishnu, not Vishnu. Love his original name, Odom Vishnu, but he prefers Nick, so we go by Nick. Okay, so Adam says he thinks the first 2 columns are important. Okay. Jaylene agrees with Adam. Okay, very good, guys. So this leads us into our discussion about conditional relative frequency. Okay, so I want us to look at the question one more time. Okay, do a greater proportion of students, right? Proportion automatically tells us we're going to be doing fractions. We're going to be dealing with decimals or fractions or percents, right? So do a greater proportion of students who do not own cats prefer to play an instrument than those who do own cats. So we're comparing 2 categories. We're comparing the students who do not own cats versus the students who do own cats. Okay, so this question has effectively created 2 subsets in the data. It's separated those kids who do own cats versus those kids who do not own cats. Okay, and notice the number of students that own a cat is 16. The number of students that do not own a cat is 19. We are looking at, from these students in these subsets, we want to look at the proportion of the students that prefer to play an instrument. Okay, so we're not talking about how many, like what's the proportion of students that out of the total. We're talking about here the proportion of students who prefer to play an instrument from the do not own cats subset. Okay, so this question is comparing these 2 subset categories. And in order to do that, we need to find the conditional relative frequency by rows, because owning a cat versus not owning a cat, those are our two rows here. Okay, we're comparing those two because it's owns a cat versus does not own a cat. And what we want to know about those two is the kids that play an instrument or prefer to play an instrument. So notice what they did here. To find the proportion of students from that don't own a cat, right? How many or what proportion of those students prefer to play an instrument? We're doing the number of students that prefer to play an instrument here divided by 19. Where did we get the 19 from? The 19 is the total number of students who do not own a cat. So we are finding the relative frequency for the subset of kids who do not own a cat. Okay, and then we're going to compare that to the subset of kids who do own a cat. So notice up here with owns a cat, we took the number of kids that own a cat and play an instrument, and we divided it by 16, which was the total number of kids that own a cat. So what does this give us? This gives us a proportion where we can say, look, 44% of kids that own a cat play an instrument versus 53% of kids that do not own a cat play an instrument. So we can say, even though the numbers are the same, we can, I'm sorry, the numbers are, this one's larger than that one. This is 10 out of 19. This is 7 out of 16, right? So that the proportions are different. It's kind of like comparing like if you go up to people and you ask, 120 people, do you like ice cream, right? And out of the 120 people, 20 of them are kids and 100 of them are adults. Because you felt weird asking kids questions. So only 20 are kids and 100 of them are adults, right? And then of the 20 kids, 10 of them said that they liked ice cream. And then of the 100 adults that you asked, 10 of them, so the same number of people, 10 of them said that they like ice cream. Okay. So I want you guys to think about that. The 10 out of the 20 kids, that's half of the kids. That's 50% of the kids said they like ice cream, right? But the 10 out of the 100 kids, right? The 10 out of the 100 kids, that's only 10%, I'm sorry, adults. The 10 out of the 100 adults, that's only 10% of adults. So those two 10s are not equivalent, right? Because that's 10 out of 20 kids, 10 out of 100 adults. So that's what conditional relative frequency allows us to see. It allows us to see the proportion based on the subset's total. Okay, and so we get a more accurate comparison, right? So in this case, right, this is a conditional relative frequency by row because the categories that we are comparing, the categories that we are saying this versus this, those were our rows. If we had, we can also do conditional relative frequency by column. So if we were interested in knowing the difference in cat preference for those who play an instrument versus those who don't. So if we were doing something where it was plays an instrument and does not play an instrument, this versus this, then we would be doing a conditional relative frequency by column, and we would be using these totals. So I would divide these two by 17. I would divide these two by 18 because these are the totals of the columns, okay? So it depends on what two categories you are comparing and what about them you're comparing. So in this case, for our cats, we're comparing owns a cat versus doesn't own a cat, and we're comparing playing an instrument about them. Whereas over here, if I were doing plays an instrument versus does not play an instrument, and I could be comparing, you know, owns a cat. So I could be looking at the proportion of kids that play an instrument, right? What proportion of them own a cat? And then look at the proportion of kids, or the number of kids that don't play an instrument, what proportion of them own a cat? So I would look at those two percentages as well. And I would use the totals of these subsets then, okay? But in this situation, looking at these percentages, yes, slightly more non-cat owners, okay, play an instrument. And slightly more, even though 10 and 7 are quite different, but it only gives us a slight difference in the amount because this is 10 out of a higher total. This is 7 out of a lower total, okay? All right, I'm gonna give you guys a minute to get this down or take your screenshot. Okay. I think I need 20 more seconds here. Mia asked a good question. She said, when is the journal due? I will make the assignment for the journal and I will show you guys the assignment, or you might see the link before then. But I'll have you guys turn it in by the end of the week, okay? Because this is the last lesson of this section that we're going to be doing a journal for. So you guys can turn in your journals for section 3, okay? All right, so this brings us to our assignment for the day, how you're going to show me. So I want to see how well you understood the difference between marginal frequency, between joint frequency, and between conditional frequency, okay? So we're going to do that by looking at male versus female in the color red, okay? So this two-way frequency table below shows which emotion males and females associate with the color red. Okay, so we have our two-way frequency table here. On the rows here, I have male versus female, so I have my gender, okay? And then notice I have 3 columns of options for our second question, which is totally fine. You can have more. I could even have more rows. That's fine. It's still called a two-way frequency table because we're talking about 2 questions, right? So these columns come from the question, which emotion do you most relate with the color red? Love, anger, or fear? So if we take a look here at our table, the first thing we want to notice, or not necessarily the first thing, but we want to notice a few things. Okay, we can see that the total of our table right here, total here, and the totals here, that means 60 people were asked, okay? 60 people were asked. And since these are my male and female, I can see that 23 out of the 60 were male, 37 out of the 60 were female, okay? So we can see that there's significantly more female here than male, okay? So we have, so they're not equal amounts. It wasn't like they specifically asked 30 males and 30 females. They just asked 60 people, okay? And then we have these totals here. 19 out of the 60 said they think it's love, anger, 26 said anger, 15 said fear, okay? And then we can go into our body where we have our joint frequencies, right? So 7 males said that they associate the color red with love versus 12 females, okay? 11 males said anger versus 15 females. 5 males said fear versus 10 females, okay? Now, in each category, it looks like, you know, the women were more, but I mean, you should also think about the fact that you had 37 females, right, versus 23. So probably gonna be more, Okay, so your assignment, okay? You're gonna look at this table and you're gonna create 4 questions for me. You're only writing the questions. The answers to your questions are already on the table, okay? Or can be calculated from the table, okay? Each of your questions, okay, 1 question each, must be answered by, one of them should be answered by a marginal frequency. Okay, one of them must be answered by a marginal frequency. The second one should be answered by a marginal relative frequency. So we're talking proportion here, right? This is how many, this is proportion. The third one should be answered by a joint relative frequency. And the fourth one should be answered by a conditional relative frequency, either by row or by column, okay? So you are going to you're going to complete this on the 1.17 two-way tables document here. And when you click on that, you're going to be able to make a copy of our two-way tables document, which will bring you to right over here. You'll see the exact same directions with the table, and you have a space to write your answers, well, your questions. And you can give me the answers if you so choose. Okay, so you can give me the question and the answer that follows. That's not a requirement, but you can do that. But over here, you're writing me the questions, okay? Any questions on the expectations of this assignment?
No, Miss Ma'am.
No, Miss Ma'am. Thank you, Mia. Anyone else? And if you have questions, that is totally fine. Okay.
Yeah, for the red part, the marginal frequencies, are we doing the definitions right there?
No. I'm just giving you the list of the types of answers that should be used, right?
Okay.
Yeah, that's just the same directions from the PowerPoint. Yeah.
All right.
Although, good question, right? It wouldn't hurt to write down the definitions for yourself. So as you're developing your questions, you kind of have an idea, right? It wouldn't hurt, but it's not a requirement.
Thanks.
No problem. Okay, so if you do not have any questions and you're clear on the assignment, this is due by the end of the week. I really suggest you guys just do it now since it's fresh in your head and get it done. Okay, but if you do not have any other questions, we are 2 minutes out to the end of class. So you are dismissed. Have a wonderful day. I miss you all. I wish you all the best. Please stay safe and healthy.
Have a good day.
Bye, Ms. K.
Bye.
Bye, Ms. K.
Bye, Edward. Bye, Diane.
Bye, Ms. K.
Bye, Adam. Bye, Nick. Bye, Jaylene. Bye, Mel. Bye, Fernando. Bye. Bye, Carter. Bye, Amber. Love you too, hon.
All right, Miss K.
All right, Steve. Have a good one, hon. Stay safe.
You too.
Bye, Denelson.